Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be very special because I finally got a Great League Giratina Origin and it took me 3 attempts to get. Actually, I think I'll start off with a little story time on how I got the Giratina. So at first, there was an account that I was going to trade with that I was really counting on the Giratina becoming or going under 1,500. And I didn't really have a plan B, so I traded with that account on the last day that this challenge was available. The challenge where you had to do 8 raids to get all of the legendary Pokemon that they were giving away. So I traded, and I got 1502 CP Giratina. And I was like starting to stress out because this was like the only plan I had. I didn't have a plan B. I didn't have someone else that I could trade with. And obviously I could have asked around in my local community, but I hate having to ask, people for favors and like if I could just take their Giratina without giving something in return. So I kind of freaked out on the last day. And we had like 10 hours left of the challenge before it went away. So I decided, don't hate me for this, do not sharpen your pitchforks. I decided to make an account and grind on that account like crazy so that I could get the 6 raids done and get the Giratina on that account. So what I ended up doing was, I created the account, I needed raid passes, but I realized that if I used my referral code, the account would be able to get 3 raid passes from doing 25 field research. So I just needed to do 25 field research on that account, and then buy the rest of the raid passes with Pokecoins, obviously. So I went out in the morning. I grinded for about 4 hours because all of the Pokestops were giving me hatch an egg research, or hatch 3 eggs. So I had to walk so much to get those 25 field research done. Eventually, after 4 hours, I got it done, and I got my raid passes. And then I still had to spend a little bit of money on that account anyways to get the final raid pass that I needed. I did the 6 raids. It took me the entire day. And then the next day, I trade from that account. And it's worse than the first trade that I did. And that's what I get for, multi-accounting. But it was almost a hundo. So I was starting to feel really discouraged. It was also on the morning of the Sinnoh tour, so I was already starting off my day with really low spirits. And I was really sad. I really wanted one so that I could make a video because, I have a channel. It would be nice to be able to showcase this Pokemon. And obviously I could ask people to submit some videos for me to review. But, I wanted my own. It would be nice for me to have one. But the next day, I get contacted by a friend who's also looking to mirror trade Giratina. I still had mine because the first 2 accounts I traded with, I didn't need to mirror with. So we end up trading, and thankfully, we both get Great League CP Giratinas. And luckily for us, we had been friends for a really long time on Pokemon Go. But lucky for us, I don't open gifts, and he wasn't opening my gifts, so we were still very low friendship. We mirror traded, and we both got Great League Giratinas. Big shout out to 89 CGY Flames fan. He's the reason that I have this Great League Giratina. And not only that, I got a really good one. It is 31215 IV, which is a rank 167 for Great League. So huge shout out to him. Thank you so much for the trade. I was really gonna give up. I was in really bad spirits. But I did have some community members, local community members, reach out to me and say that they would be willing to trade me because they don't really care about GBL. So I did have some backups, but like I said, I didn't want to go around and ask people for their Giratinas. I felt bad doing that. Now I know the question on everyone's mind, was it worth it? Yes, this thing is worth it. It's actually really good in Great League, and I feel terrible telling everyone that, yeah, you kind of need this, or, well, you don't really need it. You could probably substitute it for something else. Here's the thing about Giratina. It is absolutely going to get walled by normal types, especially if you're running it with Shadow Ball and Ominous Wind. As you can see in the match I just showed you, I got a Lickitung and I just top left against it. But in this next game, I actually do decide to stay in against the Lickitung because I want to see how the Giratina and the Giratina Lickitung matchup plays out if I only have Ghost type moves on it. And it's pretty painful. My opponent did farm me down completely. They don't throw any moves against my Giratina here, but I am able to get it quite low with the just going Shadow Ball, so it's okay, but it does easily get walled if you're only running the Ghost type moves on it. Now here's a nice thing about Giratina. Because of its Ghost and Dragon typing, it has so many resistances. It resists Electric, Grass, Water, Fire, Bug, Fighting, Normal. So it has all those resistances, which is why it is so good. It's going to wall Lantern. It's going to be good against Pokemon like I got a Superior. It was really good against that. It's also decent versus Azu and Annihilape. So it's going to be good versus a lot of things. I just hope that Niantic gives us other chances in the future to get another one of these, because I know a lot of people are still going to be looking for this. And I don't know about the people who were willing to trade because they don't play GBL, but if they play GBL in the future, maybe they'll have regrets. I don't know. But yeah, it kind of sucks that this Pokemon is very hard to get. I kind of wish that everyone had a chance to get it, and like they did with Cresselia, I think it will come back later to research, hopefully. So I definitely have hope that in the future we will have chances to get another one if we want to. Now in this video, I'm going to show you guys two teams that I built around Giratina. This first team is Skarmory, Giratina Origin, and Lantern, and I found that this team was working best out of the two teams that I built. Giratina is going to be very weak to Wigglytuff, so you need a very solid answer to Wigglytuff, and that's going to be Skarmory. And this team, I actually went 5-0 with today. I didn't record the 5-0 set again, but it did get me to my season high. Now in this first team, I am using Giratina as my safe swap, but I do not recommend using Giratina as a safe swap. Now in the next team, I use it as a lead, I believe. It is better on the lead or just being a closer in the back. If you use it as a safe swap, it is most of the time going to draw out a normal type, it's going to draw out an ice type, or the dreaded Wigglytuff, which is absolutely going to wall Giratina and eat you alive. But in this game, I did get an Annihilape lead. I swapped out into Giratina, and the Giratina drew out an Alolan Sandslash, which is actually okay because Lantern isn't going to be doing that well against Alolan Sandslash. So I managed to draw it out, and I'm actually able to win this match because Skarmory actually does okay versus Alolan Sandslash. The Steel Wings are going to be neutral, not resisted. And then I was able to win this because of how much energy I was able to build on my Skarmory from that Alolan Sandslash matchup. And all that energy, of course, against Annihilape would not be able to deal with. Now moving on to the next match, I am going to see a Talonflame on the lead, which is not good for my Skarmory. I swap into my Giratina, and my opponent has a Guzzlord in the back, and it is going to be walling us because I don't have that Dragon Pulse. Now, there are several times where I was really considering putting Dragon Pulse on my Giratina, but I really like having a bait move. It came in handy in a lot of situations. Not in this situation, unfortunately. My opponent is able to take our Giratina out with Guzzlord, and then they are able to destroy my Skarmory as well with the Brutal Swings, and I'm not able to farm it down completely without having to invest a shield. My opponent has a Talonflame in the back, and they have a Shadow Dragonite, which is going to be hurting our Lantern. We only have one shield left, so they are going to be able to reach 2 Dragon Claws. They'll land the second Dragon Claw, unfortunately, and they also have 2 shields left for their Dragonite, so they go ahead and they use both shields. I'm not able to get the Surf off before my opponent can throw a Dragon Claw, and it is going to be GG's for us. I think if I did one more Steel Wing, I might have been able to reach the Brave Bird on the Talonflame, but I'm not sure if it would have been enough to KO. Okay, in this next match, I get distracted at one point, and I'll show you guys where I get distracted, but we do start off with a really great lead of Alolan Ninetales into our Skarmory. My opponent immediately swaps into Azu, and I have Lantern in the back for Azu. So bringing in my Lantern and gonna go for these Thunderbolts. I'm going to go ahead and farm the Azu down here. Unfortunately, one Thunderbolt is not enough to take it out, so I do have to take 2 Play Roughs on my Lantern. Now, it is going to be very low HP, but at least I can get a Thunderbolt off on the Alolan Ninetales, and then I can bring Skarmory in here, and my opponent has an Umbreon in the back. Guess what? Umbreon is also going to be walling Giratina Origin with only Ghost-type moves. So, again, really considering having that Dragon Pulse on it. But I am going to stay in this matchup. My Giratina Origin will actually be able to handle the Alolan Ninetales in the back. It is low HP right now, and I should be able to Shadow Claw it down. But I'm going to go ahead and start investing my shields into my Skarmory. Now here I get a little distracted, and I throw the Brave Bird on the Alolan Ninetales. I should not have done that. I wasn't paying attention to the game, but now I have to do this really weird play where I bring my Giratina into their Umbreon. They're in the yellow, so I think a Shadow Ball and an Ominous Wind might be enough to take it out. I'm gonna go for a Shadow Ball here. It does quite a bit of damage, and I will be able to reach an Ominous Wind on CMP. So we CMP tie here. They're gonna go ahead and take our Giratina out. They live with 1 HP, but I am going to be able to Steel Wing them down with our Skarmory and take that win. So we were actually able to win that with Giratina versus Umbreon. That's very interesting. Now moving on to the final match I have recorded with this team. My opponent is going to lead Credilli into our Skarmory, so they immediately swap into a Decidueye. Now Decidueye is running Astonish, so it's actually doing quite a bit of damage to my Skarmory. I'm gonna go ahead and go for a Sky Attack before I swap out into my Giratina, and now I'm just gonna go for a full farm down. We both had to invest a shield in that matchup, which I'm okay with. My opponent brings the Credilli back in, they take the Shadow Ball, and then they swap out into their Trevenant. So they're running a triple grass team. I'm able to reach a Shadow Ball and take their final shield, and then I have to bring my Skarmory in against Trevenant because my Lantern is kind of not going to be doing well against anything on this team. It is going to be hitting for neutral with the Surfs against the Credilli at least, so I decide to save a Lantern for Credilli. Now I thought I might be able to catch a Rock Slide on my Lantern, so I attempted that, but my opponent kept farming. They go for a Grass Knot. It's not enough to take us out. I'm able to reach the Surf and take the Credilli out. GG's to our opponent. And that is going to give us another positive set with this team. I highly recommend this team. I actually played another set with it, and I went 5-0 right after. Unfortunately, I wasn't recording. All the nice stuff happens when I'm not recording. Now the next team is going to be a combination of Azu, Giratina Origin, and Annihilape. I do switch up the orders of the Pokemon based on what I'm seeing. First up, I am going to have the Giratina Origin on the lead, and we get a good lead because we get a Poliwrath, and Poliwrath is a fighter. I go ahead and I shield the Icy Wind, however, I could have let that go, but I wanted to keep my Giratina healthy. And like I said, I'm trying to show off Giratina here, so I'm not going to just let it die in the first matchup. But my opponent brings in a Charjabug against her Giratina, and Charjabug, well, Giratina actually walls Charjabug, so that was an interesting choice unless they had Crunch. But they never threw a move, so I never found out what they had. They bring Poliwrath back in, and I bring Azu in immediately while they're still switch locked, and my opponent has a Venusaur in the back. I'm actually okay with this because I'm able to get a Play Rough off on the Venusaur, but then now I can align my Giratina to their Venusaur. Unfortunately, because Giratina is in the yellow, I am going to have to shield those Frenzy Plants. A Frenzy Plant is definitely enough to take me out from this range. So I don't have any shields left here, but I was able to get it into the red, so Annihilape can come in and counter it down. One Scald is not going to be enough to take Annihilape out. I'm going to be able to counter the Poliwrath down and then take the Venusaur out with a counter. So GG's to our opponent, we're able to take that win. Now moving on to the next match, we are going to see a Basti on the lead, and this is where I decide to swap Azu to my lead instead of Giratina on the lead. My opponent, it looks like, is running a Grass Hole team, so it is going to be Basti Double Grass. I'm not going to be able to win this because I have Annihilape in the back. Azu did not draw out the Poison Grass type. We drew out a Bayleaf. If my opponent had brought in the Poison Grass type, which is what I assume they have in the back, then my Annihilape might have had a chance against this Bayleaf. But they bring in Bayleaf, and my opponent is going to bring Basti into our Giratina Origin, and they have a as I expected, they have a victory bell in the back, so I'm not going to be able to win this. I just top left. On to the next match. I am still running that Giratina on the lead. I haven't swapped it into Azu lead yet, but I do get an Azu lead. This is what I actually want to see. I want to see how Giratina performs against Azu. So I'm going to go straight for Shadow Ball, and I decided to go ahead and shield the Ice Beam, but my opponent also decides to shield my first Shadow Ball. Now, I tried to catch an Ice Beam on my own Azu, but my opponent is smart. They saved all that energy, and then they swap into a Toxicroak, which is actually not an answer to Azu. I'm going to go for Play Rough, and then I am able to take the Toxicroak out with a Play Rough and with the bubble damage. And then my opponent brings in a Stunfisk, and they are going to have to shield our Hydro Pump. Now, they're going to have to go for an Earthquake if they want to take us out. I'm not going to shield the Earthquake. I let the Azu go, and then I recognize that I can bring Annihilape in and start building up a bunch of energy so that I could have energy to throw at this Azu. I go for a Shadow Ball, and here, because they baited with the Ice Beam, I was thinking they might go for a Play Rough here, and it might be enough to take our Annihilape out, but they go for another Ice Beam, so I don't know, maybe they weren't running Play Rough, or maybe they just gave up. I don't know what happened there. By the way, I don't really recommend the team that I'm running at the moment. I just wanted to try a few different team compositions with Giratina. This team in particular is extremely weak to Whimsicott. But anyways, moving on to the next match, we are going to see a terrible lead of Dragonite into our Giratina, and I don't want to swap my Azu because I'm expecting my opponent to have an answer to Azu in the back because they're running that Shadow Dragonite on the lead. So I bring in Annihilape, and I just let my Annihilape go. At least I'm able to take a shield from them with the Ice Punch. Now, after Annihilape goes down, I bring Azu in. My opponent does not let me farm them down with my Azu, and they instead swap in their own Azu. Now, what I'm going to do is I want them to throw their energy, and then I am thinking of bringing Giratina in so that I could start building up some energy, because Giratina is going to be resisting the fast move from Azu at least. But honestly, I just played this entire match really poorly. There wasn't much that I could do. I had to throw a move on the Azu, and it had to be the Shadow Ball because I don't think Ominous Wind would have taken it out. But this Dragonite has enough for 2 Dragon Claws, and I wasted one of my shields on the move from Azu, so they are going to be able to take our Giratina out. My opponent has a Lantern in the back, so I wasn't able to handle the Shadow Dragonite very well with the Pokemon that I had, or the team composition that I had, because we're kind of like ABA weak to Shadow Dragonite, where my lead Giratina was going to be weak to it, and if I swap Annihilape into it, that's not really an answer. So this is where I decide to swap into Azu on the lead, because I was seeing a lot of leads that Azu would take care of a lot better than Giratina. I was seeing Fighter leads, I was seeing Dragonite leads, I was seeing Basti leads, but of course, as soon as I put the Azu on the lead, I see the Lickitung, and I don't really have anything that I can swap into Lickitung, so I have to soft lose that. I go for the Hydro Pump, and then my opponent, instead of letting me farm them down with my Annihilape, they swap into Lantern, and this is actually good for me because Giratina is going to wall Lantern, so I bring Giratina into it, and I build up as much energy as I can before throwing the Shadow Ball. Of course, the Shadow Ball is not going to be enough to take it out, but at least we're able to Shadow Claw the Lantern down before it can reach another move. We're able to throw a Shadow Ball on the Lickitung and take it out, thankfully, and then my opponent has a Skeledirge in the back. I'm able to take a shield from them with the Ominous Wind on Giratina, and then I bring Annihilape in. I had some energy on the Annihilape from before. I go straight for Shadow Ball in case my opponent decides to call a bait, because their win condition actually is to call a bait. Luckily, they do call the bait, and we're able to land the Shadow Ball and take the Skeledirge out. Now, moving on to the next match, we are going to see an amazing lead of Talonflame into our Azu. My opponent immediately swaps into a Jellicent. Now, I didn't react fast enough. I should have brought in my Giratina, but I stay in with Azu a little bit. I take the Shadow Ball, and then I bring in Giratina. I decide to go for an Ominous Wind, but my opponent goes ahead and shields it. That's actually pretty good for me. I'm at least taking shields from my opponent. But my opponent builds up to a Shadow Ball, and they also bait us with a Surf, so unfortunately they take a shield from me as well, and it looks like I am going to go ahead and invest both of my shields into that matchup. Now my opponent recognized that I could farm their Jellicent down, so they swapped back into Talonflame. Our switch timers were misaligned because I had stayed in with my Azu, but I'm able to go for a Shadow Ball, and it is enough to take the Talonflame out, and then my opponent just top lefts. GG's. Now moving on to the next game, we are going to see a Shadow Skarmory on the lead, and the way I like to play this out is I will build up to the Hydro Pump, and then I will bait with a Play Rough. Because it's Shadow, my opponent is almost definitely going to shield it, so I'm going to go for that Play Rough, fully expecting them to shield. We take a shield from them, and then I swap into my Giratina, but of course I'm going to shield whatever my opponent is going to throw at me here. Now we draw out a Dragonair. Again, like I said, I don't like using Giratina as a safe swap. It doesn't usually draw anything out that I actually want it to draw out. I think if I could pair it with something else that will draw out its weaknesses and use that instead as a safe swap, that might be a better strategy. I'm still trying to figure out what I can pair it with, but in this match we are going to be met with Double Dragon in the back, and it is going to be very difficult for me to take that match, so I'm going to go ahead and lose that, unfortunately. GG's to our opponent. Now moving on to the next match, we are going to see another Lickitung on the lead, and as I played this before, I'm going to go ahead and soft lose this because I can't really swap into anything in the back because I don't want this to align with my Giratina. If it aligns with Giratina, it is going to absolutely wall me. So I'm going to go ahead and go for a Hydro Pumps against this Lickitung, and then I'm just going to let Azu go, bring Annihilape in, and hope that my opponent lets me farm them down completely. They are going to reach a move here, however, and it is not enough for a Power Whip. It's going to be a Body Slam, which Annihilape resists. My opponent is then going to bring in a Whiscash. I'm going to go for a Shadow Ball. Thankfully, they no-shield it. I make a catch on my Giratina, hoping that it was Scald. Scald would be resisted, but they go for a Mud Bomb, and they're going to be able to go for another Mud Bomb here, and it looked like I was going to be able to farm it down with Giratina, so my opponent swaps out, and they have a Registeel in the back. They go ahead and they top left because Giratina is actually going to wall Registeel, and I had a fighter left in the back. I also had both shields, so GG's to our opponent. Moving on to the next match, we are going to see a Gligar on the lead. Another really nice lead for us. If I have Ice Beam, which I don't, then the Gligar is going to get destroyed by Azu. But my opponent is going to safe swap into a Skarmory. I build up energy on my Azu before I swap out, and I take a Sky Attack, and then I'm going to swap into Annihilape because Annihilape actually does really well against the Skarmory. Now here I make a mistake. I should have gone for the Shadow Ball. The Ice Punch is not enough to take the Skarmory out, and unfortunately I have to invest both of my shields into Annihilape, but I have a lot of energy built up, so I'm going to go for these Ice Punches against this Gligar, and I should be able to reach a second Ice Punch and take my opponent's final shield, and then I immediately swap into Azu. Because I had all that energy built up, I go immediately for that Hydro Pump, and my opponent has an Azu in the back. This is actually okay. I still have a full health Giratina left in the back, so Giratina should be able to take a Play Rough or an Ice Beam from Azu at full health, and I am going to be able to get it low with the Play Roughs from my own Azu. They're not going to be able to farm us down with the bubbles, so they have to go ahead and throw a move here. Now I just have to bring in Giratina and go for a Shadow Ball to take this Azu out. Here you'll see how much a Play Rough will do to a Giratina from full health. Not enough to take us out. I go for an Ominous Wind because at this point they are in Ominous Wind range, and we take that win. Moving on to the final match of the video, we are going to see a nice lead of Annihilape into our Azu. I'm going to go straight for that Play Rough and take shields from my opponent. I'm going to no-shield the Shadow Ball. It's okay. Azu is bulky and should be able to take them, but I am going to have to shield the second Shadow Ball, unfortunately. I reach another Play Rough before my opponent can get another Shadow Ball off, and they decide not to invest their second shield into their Annihilape, and then they just top left. I guess their team was probably weak to Azu, but that win is going to give us a 4-1 in that set. Now, I do manage to get 2 4-1s and 1 5-0 with Giratina Origin. I went ahead and I played the first team that I used, which is Skarmory, Giratina Origin, and Lantern again today, and I am currently at my season high. which is not that high actually for me because usually in previous seasons I was able to reach a lot higher towards the end of the season. But because this season I wasn't playing as much as I did before, like in the past week we had Sinnoh Tour, which I was really focused on. I had a few events that I needed to go to, and I had university projects, so I wasn't playing as much GBL as I usually would. But now I am currently at my season high. You can see my elo on the screen, and I can highly recommend that first team that I was using. I just wish that the Giratinas were easier to get because I know a lot of people are not going to have them, unfortunately. But that brings us to the end of our video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoy my videos, please consider subscribing. Maybe leave a like, it helps me out so much. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!